Good evening, everybody. Welcome. It is a wonderful Monday night because Cubby's gone. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. We love you, Cubby. I know you're watching this from Rome. That's
Yes,
okay.
this
We,
is
we still love
this
you.
is high priority for him. He's in Rome,
It
and he's gonna
is.
be
It
like, "Oh,
is.
we got to step into the middle of the night because we got to watch."
Exactly. I mean, like, come on. What else would he be doing? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know, seeing the Vatican or something. I mean, come
yeah,
on.
he's seeing old
He's better.
things.
No,
He's
no,
like,
it's even better because you're back.
well,
This is like the first time I've been on here with you in like
it's been a
forever and a
while.
day.
It's been a while. It's they don't let me get on very often anymore. It seems there's always something going on. Busy time of the year.
Yes.
So, Dan, tonight I wanted to talk about music crates. This is an area we talked about this on numerous shows and different thoughts and theories and such, but it's a question that has been popping up. It's kind of astounding the number of DJs who are maybe going from a PC to a Mac, or going from Serato to virtual, or going from this to that, or they're going from something very simple and basic to actually now needing to have a library and manage the library. And they're like, how do you do it? What do you do? So I really wanted to just kind of to have tonight be kind of more of a kind of a theory on our thoughts, rather than for us to go through and say, oh, folder A should contain this song, next song, because I don't think that's very helpful in the long run for many people. Because for someone who's just starting out, they just are wanting is there a way to organize to be better? And I think that's kind of the discussion. So first off, for myself, I've been using virtual DJ now for 4 or 5 years now. How
What
maybe
what did you use before, John? What
I
did you use before?
well, before I used to use cassette tapes. Yeah, I used to use cassette tapes way back in the day, and before that, even had some vinyl, and then after then we came into um, the getting into some CDs, and then some mini discs for a while. Oh yeah, it was just good old times.
Wow.
Yeah, it
I
was,
didn't know anybody else besides myself who used mini disc.
yeah,
That's impressive.
yeah. Those were very impressive, especially in the Minnesota, where we had these old VFWs with the real soft floor. The mini disc, they could jump. As it's like, oh yeah, we're playing Moni Moni, but we're playing it off the mini disc, and we'll play the slow song off the CD player. Let's go. And they could jump and jump and jump and never get anywhere. It was great. Hello, Robin. Thank you for joining us tonight. So Dan, when it came to transitioning from CD to the computer and that needing to manage music, what were some of your early struggles with that, or how did you kind of approach that process?
Very poorly. When I started out with CDs, I had an organization. I mean, I still had like it was a binder that was, very similar to something like this,
Yep.
where every song was in there and the first half was organized by artists. No, probably by title. I think it was by title. And the second half like was by BPM
Okay.
because I was looking for that mixing aspect and also I took that idea. So when I first started actually mixing was I was working in a bar that turned into a club at night, and we had a service that provided us a book of
Okay.
sorts with their pieces, and that's how it was organized, right? They would give us the title, and then there was another spot where they gave us the BPM, and it really to kind of help us pick and choose quickly with what we were doing. So when I got into organizing and creating, one of the other pieces to that programming piece that they used with that service was also by style.
Hmm.
So I would have a folder for country. I would have a folder for what I called pop rock. Um, I had a folder for classic rock, and I think I had another one that I called slow, like slow/love.
Now, did they,
Um,
when you refer to it as style, did they call it that, or is that a terminology that you brought to it and then you created
a,
those?
a little bit of both.
Okay.
Their styles weren't quite that same aspect. They had a slightly different um mentality to it. They did have they did call them styles, but they had like, oh my gosh, I want to say it was like disco and funk. Um, and then there was like a rock, which kind of really was anything that was rock and pop.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of similarities between the two, but I didn't take like their list and use it for mine because I didn't agree with some of the stuff that they utilized.
Sure.
Um, it was just the programmer who created it and we had some arguments over the phone a few different times. Um, to put it mildly, like there was a couple screaming matches at different times. I'm surprised they still let me work at this place. Um, but no, so that was what I would do. So I did my folders like that. I did, each creation was like that. And that was probably what I did for, oh my gosh, probably the first 10 years
Mm-hmm.
of what I was doing before I decided I wanted to do something else. I felt like it wasn't helpful for certain types of events I was doing. Like for weddings, it was okay. But if I went to do a school dance or not school dance, if I went to do a class reunion, it was very difficult because then I was like pulling everything, trying to figure out like the years that they were.
Sure.
So I determined that I needed to do something different at that point, and that's when I kind of went a slightly different direction.
So mine, again, coming from CDs, for some reason the logical thing to me seemed to be to keep them in folders as they were when I ripped them off the CDs, especially the like the Platinum Series discs, because I knew that on disc one of the songs I like to play was say on disc 10 track 8. Well, I thought, well, if I kept them in folders, the disc 10 songs, I would be fine looking for music throughout my career the same way. Not having a full grasp, especially early on when we started with the computers, of how that evolves into a search functionality. Compared to when we would open up that binder book you just showed a little bit, and you'd be looking, okay, I know on disc 10 this has got a lot of disco on it. Oh yeah, here's a song I haven't played for a while. And then a disc 11 has also disco songs, and oh yeah, here's a song that'll go with it. And that's how we would find songs. So I tried to manage things that way, and it was a mess. Lots of folders.
But I could see where that had its presence, right? Like if you memorized, right? Especially that transition from CD to digital of any sort. If you memorized like certain patterns and certain places where they would go, and that was kind of the same way with me. Like that binder that I had was all my burnt CDs, right? I
Sure.
would rip all my music so that I didn't have an album when I really only needed two songs. So I ripped them all and I would memorize a lot of times where they were because I grabbed from them so
Yep.
often. So I could see where there's definite pros to that, but yeah, it definitely doesn't use the advantages of digital in that case.
Very much so. And I think it probably, and then some of the early rips when we were doing that, the genre tags, you're kind of referring to the style tag issue. And that was a big issue early on, is that many of the ID tagging software that were out there were not that accurate. Either it would maybe give you the song title and the artist, but it wouldn't give you any of the other information. So then you were entering things in. And then it becomes a overwhelming task. It's like, okay, I just ripped in 40 discs and I did not put any tags in. I have to go back and put tags in for all these. I'll get to
Oh,
it
I
later.
never bothered.
Yeah,
MJ and I used to argue about this, not argue about this, but MJ would just like shake his head. For those of you that remember for MJ and stuff, he was big on tagging and hindsight, he's 100% right.
he's definitely
Like,
right. Yes.
but yeah, I never tagged anything. I would put it into not physical, into digital folders on my hard drive by genre.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just drag and drop, drag and drop, drag and drop, drag and drop. And that's what I utilized for my organization. I didn't use the actual tags.
Yeah, and early on, my transition from CD into digital software, we were using Megaseg, and a big part of Megaseg. Well, you were getting thirsty. I could see it there, Dan. So I want to make sure I got it for you. But one of the importing capabilities with that is that if you would be bringing in a folder that had, say, all 80s, you could actually set on the input what the genre tags would be for those songs you just inputted, which was in some cases, specifically if you're bringing like the best of 1998's music videos in from promo only, that worked out wonderfully because, or the hairband. Well, the hairband, it was, whatever the 80s hairband, 80s rock, comma hairband type of thing as you're setting these genres up, and it imported, and then it would write those tags, and it was a huge benefit, but it was still hugely cumbersome. I mean, it was just not a good a good way to do it, but that's what we had when we were starting, and we did the best with what we could. Unless you were MJ, who really put the time into it, which, here we are looking. I still have many songs on my computer that don't have decent tagging, and MJ's are brought down where he can search, left, right, and upside down and find anything he wants.
But I would say, as beneficial as tagging can be, as well done as that can help, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's required to maybe have those extra tags. Especially with what we have within virtual, within Serato, the ability to create the crates and the virtual folders to be what you're looking for. And the fact that you can take them from computer to computer with that organization already set up. I think if you're using your virtual folders, your crates in such a way that becomes those tags, it can, for lack of better terms, have the same quickness to it, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
have the same piece. Unless, for example, you had a certain tag that went across a couple different folders. Then I could see some of the help there. But I just feel like it feels like there's openness that it doesn't have to be there to be done well.
Sure, and I would definitely agree with that as we go through. Uh, Gus mentions, of course, spending hours and hours of retagging and updating ID tags. Oh yeah, I remember. I spent a weekend. I was just going to do that. Yeah, Kylie mentioning that auto taggers, didn't always work, don't always work. Yeah, they
I
exactly.
never could find a good one. That was the problem that I had. And maybe because I was too cheap to spend. I was willing to spend, I think, for the auto taggers if I knew it would work,
Yeah,
but I couldn't
exactly.
find ones that worked.
And no,
Like
nothing.
like that was the thing. Like nobody would tell me, "Oh, like this one's great." And it's like, "Okay." And it would be a free one and I go to use it and it wouldn't work. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah, and then it's like, well, that was just 1999. I just wasted.
"Yeah."
So of course, tagging, I definitely would agree with you when it comes to that, but that is part of the process because tagging really feeds into the search functionality of a lot of our software. Um, Getting back to the actual folders and building crates and such, you mentioned school reunion type things, the type
Mhm.
activities, and and that kind of leads to the whole concept, I think, of creating. Because I've seen people talk about this and saying, "Oh, I make folders or crates based on decade." So I've got an 80s folder and I've got a 90s folder and that kind of a situation. Looking specifically now, not that everybody does class reunions, but if you're looking at something like a class reunion, I have found that, and I do have that. I do have songs by decade. I have found that is almost next to useless when it comes to doing class reunions. And
Really?
the reason for that is that when you're doing a class reunion, generally you're wanting to have the songs that hit their sophomore, junior year, maybe their senior year a little bit. But you get into college, yes, they'll all know those songs. But I mean, if you're wanting to play songs that they experienced in high school, so let's say they graduated in 1983. Well, there's a lot of great music that will be in your 1980s folder that is from 1984. And they're going to that will be beyond their high school years. And I have had people, you do realize that was after us, don't you? It's like, well, yeah, but it's a really good song. But yeah, it was after us. You need to be playing the song, the first release, which was from our year, and this is like the third release from that album. And it's like, shut up. Don't make me feel bad. But that became kind of an issue, that when you get into a situation where you have a specific need of a very tight uh, date range, the decades doesn't help as much as you would think it would.
Let's just face it, John, your clients are jerks.
Pretty much.
Um, you're right. I do understand what you're mentioning there, right? Like, and that's where I think I will say this is where it could help you a little bit with your tagging, right? Like, so for example, you could put them, figure out the release date by year or something like that. That's how I would determine what went into or which folder it went into to begin with. So I could write the tag at that point, or at least writing the tag of the top ones from that decade, right? You don't have to go out and put all 200 from every year. But if you had the top 10 or 15 from each year and make sure that those get tagged with the appropriate year, I think that would help. And then you could have it in the 80s folder, but still be able to utilize that more narrow search um for that class reunion situation.
And that's actually where I was kind of headed to, and where that really came into mind is the other day listening to Aaron Strawn's. We're listening to him talk a little bit, and he mentioned the idea of doing a mix show with basically the number ones, is what I think he was referring to that in that particular show. And he was just, it would be basically mixing just the number one hit. So you know that they're great songs because they all hit number one. Which, if you follow the number one charts, there's some of the most played songs. Most of the songs we play did not hit number one. Most of the songs we play hit five or five or lower. And nothing against the idea. I love the idea, but I think as I was listening to that, I was thinking, instead of my decades folder do I need to go down to by the year? But I think that kind of what you were alluding to is that if a person would take that list of the top 100 songs from 1984, and if you would basically go and find those on your computer, make sure they're tagged with 1984 type of a situation, now they become searchable. So in essence, you're tagging them, or there's a year date on Virtual DJ, and I'm sure it's on every other software out there also for meta tagging. But that would give you the top 100 song. You could search for the top 100 songs from 1984, which could have its advantages while yet still being in that folder. So after listening to that a little bit, when Aaron said that, it's like, maybe there is a logic to that. That could be another weekend.
Well, and his idea or his point to what he's getting at. This goes back to I think something Nick Spinelli said in his show that Aaron was referencing, where Nick's idea was, like, listen, if you're looking for a great idea, scrap the idea of the top 200 and just go and grab the top song from, not did it hit number one, but the number one song from that year, and look at, and go back each, and if you go back 20 years, there's 20 songs that were guaranteed hits. They were not hit number one and then died immediately, but if they were number one for the year, they had some staying power. And so you quickly can build create a virtual folder that is going to be that's going to be substantial to be able to be used. Whether we create or mix with that or not, or is a different story. But it just has that opportunity to kind of flesh that out a little bit. Um, and give us those. The key that I think is a lot of us have kind of mentioned, you, or maybe we haven't mentioned this yet, but it was in my brain as I guess. So I guess it's like, oh, everybody heard me say that in my head. Um,
I thought I heard
which would
something.
be,
Wasn't sure.
yeah,
Wasn't sure if it was the
we
ghost of
had that
Cubby,
telepathic thing.
coming through from Rome. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe. But for a lot of us, the organization that we do really has to cater to the type of events that we're doing.
Yes, I think that's huge.
And I don't know, I don't know if there's someplace you're going to necessarily go with this, but
Mm-hmm.
within my system, I have a couple virtual folders that are within virtual folders.
Okay,
And,
understand.
and
Yep.
and what I mean by that, so I have one, for example, listed weddings, and within it are dance, party songs, slow songs, country dance, right? Like stuff that I'm going to use at a wedding. I've got another virtual folder called schools. And then within my schools are my door open, my classics, my recurrents, my currents, right? And so all those go within that. And one of the nice things about that is like I can close that folder if I'm obviously not using that type of event, and it can stay hidden. But having that allows us to have those different organization pieces for what's important. So, for example, class reunions, you need to have a small, narrow window, as John was saying. But if you're doing an event for a wider audience,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can get away with decades here. I think decades is perfectly acceptable, and you don't need to spend the time tagging every year, even for the top 100 or even top 50 for each year. I don't know. That's my thought.
And I could definitely see that because there is a lot of times where like right now I'm looking at the best of 1984. You're looking at that list, and there are some of those songs that came out in 1983, and there are some of those songs that also hit the best of 1985. So it's not a cut and dry situation unless you were going to go by release date, which again, the best of 1984, I would guesstimate at least 20 of those were probably released in 1983, if not more of them. It just took some time for them to peak on the charts. during 1984.
Right. And a lot of times your big songs for the year were the songs that were released earlier on because they got more, I mean, because at that point it was basically based on radio play. They got more radio plays because they were physically on the radio longer, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if if I start a song being played in January, it's going to get more plays than a song that I start in November.
Yeah,
It's just kind of the way it goes. So there is some big pieces there. The one thing you always got to be careful though, especially if you decades, is stuff that's released right at the turn of the decade.
yeah.
And and so John, I'm going to ask you a question. Ice Ice Baby, is it 80s or is it 90s?
I play it. It didn't. It came out in the 80s, didn't it?
Depends. Depends on how you look at it. So the album came out in 89. The song was released in the
In
90s,
1990. Yeah,
1990. So it's one
August
of those songs
August of
that
'1990. Wow.
if you go by that, it gets thrown into either or. I always throw that out because I've had some arguments, like some fun arguments with
Yeah.
some of my friends who have done like 90s parties and they go to play it. And I'm like, wait, well, hold up, hold up. If you look at that, it says 89. And and that's something that's being, just stupid analyzing, right? Like nobody who's dancing to it goes, oh no, that was in the wrong decade. Like they're gonna have fun with it because they're gonna have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some that turn of the turn of the year always gets interesting. So like 80s into 90s, you had definitely more of that pop hip hop starting to come out.
Mm-hmm.
90s into 2000s, you had the boy band transition, right? So some of the boy bands are late 90s, some of the others are early 2000s. So you see, there's that weird kind of blending that where the decades cannot be your only go to for your
For sure.
organization.
For sure. And I think that's because one of my main is by decades with the older, but then after a while, it's like okay, so we get into the '90s specifically. The '90s era because we were playing a lot in bars. Now we had a completely separate type of playlist that we were playing, kind of a '90s pop we were doing on some nights. We had '90s country night that we were doing, so we have a full gamut of. So it became okay. Here's the '90s folder, and within that '90s folder, now we have some of the main genres, the things that were the grunge rock world, that type of stuff that isn't the pop, trying to put things in a somewhat logical breakdown. So that way, if I'm looking for '90s country, I'm not going to be seeing the Backstreet Boys as an example. It will show Shania Twain, Garth Brooks, whatever. Um, but even with that type of a process, you get to the point of if it makes sense for me, I think that then it works for me. But with Michael, he looks at that and he's like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't. It isn't how he would follow his thought process for looking for music or dealing with music and such. So it becomes what is the best way to do that? Is there a best way?
I know that this is a path that I went down and struggled with for the longest time, or at least it felt like the longest time, because I knew what I had I didn't like. Like there was things about the organization that I didn't like, and part of it was that I ended up continually coming back to the same songs, or there was just so many songs that I was getting lost in the scroll. I
Mm-hmm.
was getting lost in trying to find something. I either had stuff that just there's no way I would play it at that event. It really just kind of was there because I wanted to make sure I had it in the one-off type of situations. So I knew I had to do something different.
Sure.
And that's where, something like Crate Hackers, something like Nick Spinelli offered his crates at one time. Justin, the DJ from down in Texas, he offered his up, and I have my hands kind of in a bunch of the different ones. And I would encourage you if like you're just feeling completely lost on where to begin with these, that you do that. That you find a way to get a handle on one of these and play with it, right? Like don't destroy what you have. Like that's one of the things I think a lot of people they get themselves in some trouble because like, oh, I'm gonna completely abandon what I had and I'm gonna go over here and use Billy Bob's setup that he was willing to let me check out.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? The first event you go, I can't find
Anything.
anything
Yeah.
in
Like,
this.
what is Billy
Right?
Bob
I like,
smoking when he did this? I don't know.
yeah, like it may make sense for him, but now it doesn't make sense for me. And now what I had is completely gone. Don't do that. Don't go that direction. Keep what you have and create on a backup computer or something like that so that you can play around at your house and go, okay, this is where this would be, this is where this would be, this is how I can do this, how I can do it that. Because then that will help you. But I think it's important for you to try those things out because, and this is what I've heard a lot of people say, but I just could not make sense of it. They're like, it has to make sense for you. And I'm like, yes, I agree. It has to make sense for me, but I don't know what makes sense for me.
Mm-hmm. I think there's
Like that,
just
like
so
that,
many possibilities.
that was, that was the struggle piece. It's like, I know I needed it to make sense for me, but I didn't know what that looked like.
Mm-hmm. Again,
So that's where these other pieces kind of came into play.
going back to when we had CDs and we obviously had memorized where things were, whatever, but we still had cheat sheets that we had put together. And I've kind of talked about this where in our case, we just kind of A, B, C, and D. A songs were basically your bangers. Regardless of genre, it was the bangers. B songs were the songs that would work most of the time at a show. A's would always work. It was just one of those, and B's were a high probability of working. C would be the second or third song in the set where you were going from a banger to that, and then maybe to another good song as you went to another set, whatever. But it was a good song, but it wasn't going to be a lead position song. And then D songs would be only played if requested. So we'd go through and maintain the A and the B list very well back in the day. So then it became a process of, okay, so, and even Robin mentions, throughout the term bangers here just a couple of minutes ago, and it's like, that I had that list, and I thought maybe if I'd put together a bangers, folder, that this would be great. But I found that as I started looking to do more keeping beats more in sync and doing different things such as that, I find that going to that bangers folder is less beneficial. Because if I start doing that, if I start going to the banger folder, it's like, well, I'm looking for something that is in this type of a song. I'm looking for something from about the 2000s that's going to be at the 115 beat per minute. And I'm probably not going to find it in the bangers folder because that's just this small group of songs where now I'm going to have to transition and go find, and it might be I'm looking at the 2000 to 2009 folder, however it works out.
Yeah. It's funny you start mentioning like the ABC category and everything, and instantly, like my head goes to radio. That was like for those of you that do radio programming or have been in radio stations, a lot of your programmers have that. And the one that I don't know if this was across the board or if it was just what I dealt with my stations that I was working with. A was exactly that. That was our top rotation. That was the songs that we were playing all the time. B were our recurrents. C were our brand news. D was our gold, and E might be like our throwbacks, old school, like goes back a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that would be the breakdown. So, like, there's some benefit of that. I don't think it's completely wrong. It's just how big do you let that folder get? And I think that's also the key, right? Like, for example, you talked about how the breakdown of year or going to a different field. If I have an A rotation that's 50 songs, I don't think that's such a bad thing to necessarily scroll through. If I've got an A list that is 500 songs, yeah, that's a different
Yeah, when
story.
you used that phrase, what, doom scrolling a minute ago or a little bit ago or whatever,
Yeah.
however you did it, it's like, oh man, that sounds familiar. I've caught myself doing that a lot. Um,
Well,
when,
especially like back when I had to download every song, like or download every like individual song or buy every individual song, or case in point, like I didn't start DJing for mobile events until late 90s.
hmm,
So my 80s collection is pretty much like the hits, right?
sure.
But when I got into a pool subscription, like late 2000s, early 2010s, my music catalog exploded.
Yeah.
And so there were a ton of tracks in there that were worthless that I never played once,
Hmm.
but I didn't take them out for the longest time.
I saw somebody had posted about that specific situation, and they had mentioned that after, if they haven't played a song in a year, that they basically delete it off their hard drive, but yet they keep it in the like in a Dropbox folder. That they must have their master list there. A lot of people have been talking recently about getting away from external hard drives and basically narrowing things down. I think this is kind of an MJ philosophy. Is I've got all my music internal, nothing external. And I think that's how MJ operates. And I could be wrong on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's the way he's gone. But he's managing his list really tight too. If he there's a song, he's going to find the version or two that he wants of that song, and that's it. And if those songs that are released, if they don't have what he's looking for, i.e., potential popularity, he's not dealing with it, or he's not bringing it in.
I think that's great if you're playing often.
Very true. Yeah.
If you're not playing, if you're not out playing like as frequent as MJ is, and I love him dearly, but the boy's out like 3 or 4 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, playing to say, okay, if I don't, and I'm not saying that was him necessarily, but if you're in that situation where you're playing 3 and 4 times a week, yeah, if you don't play it in a year, I think that's a good bet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, it's definitely a good bet. For me, I'm doing 30 events in a year.
Yeah, we don't
Right.
have
Like,
that.
and that's not weddings. That's like all of my type of events. Right. There's probably a lot of things that came out, depending upon when they came out, that I just never worked in. Either they were popular at a point where I just didn't work them in, or I had a little gap in my calendar when maybe they were the most popular, and by the time I was playing, they were there, but it wasn't something that I was going to necessarily grab with
Mm-hmm.
that kind of same attention. I might want to keep them around. So my philosophy, I usually wait 2 years. And 2 years is because I don't want to accidentally delete something that came out in December because I didn't hear of it. And I'll go through and I'll play the track. And if it doesn't sound familiar to me after the 2 year part, then I move it to what I call a backup folder.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got like one master backup folder that's in like a separate part of my hard drive, and it just collects all that junk. There's all of that potential junk. And I keep it there for the simple fact of every once in a while, especially, I'll do a different type of events. Like the main time I do school events is typically the spring.
Yep.
Occasionally I'll get a fall one, right? Well, again, something may have been popular in fall. I didn't have any fall school dances, so I didn't play it.
Yep.
So I assumed, and because I'm like, well, I never really heard it, but come to find out that one was actually like a pretty popular song among the school group. All right. Well, then it suddenly shows up on a request list. I don't want to have to go re-download it. I want to have to go look off my master hard drive somewhere to try and grab it. It's in this big backup folder. Then I pull it back in, and I'm like, okay, that's worth keeping around for a little bit longer. Maybe not forever, but for a little longer. So,
And it becomes the whole, for those of us who don't do many shows and we get that one high school dance or that one or two unusual dances where all of a sudden we needed those. All of a sudden I was, last fall I played a bar. I hadn't played a bar in a couple of years. Well, there's a different musical consumption going on at a bar than there is for a wedding. And yes, there's many similarities, but there was requests for some songs that I would never play at a wedding, but yet they went over incredibly well. Hence, that flexibility has got to be there too. And it's like, oh, how do you manage that? Where if you're doing just that type of dance all the time, it'd be great.
I do. And I know this is a controversial piece, but I do like the idea that a lot of people have started to go towards um, with streaming.
Hmm.
And from the standpoint, not using it for their master collection, not using it for, what they're going to play off, all night long, but to really stream down what they have to just what is important. And then they keep these streaming subscriptions as an option for those situations, for those times where it's like, you know what? I never would have thought in 100 years I would have had a request for that song. You know what? They asked for it tonight.
And
And you know what? It would probably fit this crowd now that I think about that song. Oh, but he didn't put on this drive. Oh, but I've got my subscription to whatever streaming. I can pull that in. I think in those circumstances, again, that's where I think it can be used, right? You're not trying to pull everything. It's not their first dance song, right? It's a song that's going to be used in throughout the night, and those songs load completely before you go to play it. They're not. Well, I'm not talking about playing it off of YouTube. I'm not talking about playing it off of Spotify.
Hmm.
I'm talking about the software that integrates, or the streaming that integrates with your software. So the song completely is there before you ever decide to hit play. That I think is the place where there's room for helping you stream down and still CYA.
Yeah, and I think as we continue on, and the internet is becoming better and better, and there's more hotspot capability, what have you. I think we're going to get to that point in time where we might be going out there with 1,000 songs on our computer, and then everything else is going to be out in the cloud somewhere, and we can easily grab and access as we need to. Until it doesn't work.
That's the one thing. Like, as great as that might be, I still have potential issues where my internet decides to go down.
Hmm.
Right. I still and what do we do in those moments? So I get what you're saying. I think what I would end up having in that situation, I would still have my backup. I would still have my backup that's ready to go. Um, for God forbid if something's unforeseen gonna happen there. But
So let's kind of talk a little bit about you. You mentioned, of course, you've got a weddings folder, and then within that you have some different things. But what are some of your and those might be, but your most used folders that you have within your system of how you've organized your music. And again, these are in most cases virtual folders. It's not like we're going into the on a hard drive and actually moving songs around. They're being found, brought in, and then we are moving them into a virtual folder.
on the digital folders within the computer, I have it by year. I have it by decade, I should say. Within the last couple of years, I do it by year. I don't move it into a decade until like the decade is complete or until it's a little bit bigger.
Sure.
Within that standpoint. And then I have like and then I do have a breakdown, like for example, country, and then within country I have my decades. So that's how I break down the digital setup. But yeah, exactly. I like virtual folders. I pull things into those folders to match what I'm looking for. And my setup, I, it's Joe Buns. It's Joe Buns, and I know that because in the very early stages of Crate Hackers, in the very before beginning, they threw out lists, not playlists, but crate lists. Like that was kind of like the idea behind the very beginning. And one of them that they shared out was Joe's, which and I've just kind of added to it as time's gone on. But it was dance and hip hop, slow, and then party songs. And this is all within, and then country, I think, was another category. And these were all within what he called essentials. So these were the ones that he was grabbing from at any particular time. And so those tend to be my most used folders. Now, not the slow ones so much, but the dance and hip hop and the party songs tend to be a lot of my go-tos within there. And I really appreciate it because there was a lot of tracks in there that I had been overlooking. And that
Yes.
was one of the reasons why I also was looking for something different. I was looking for those tracks that I had been overlooking because I didn't experience them, I didn't live them, and yet I needed to have them.
Hmm.
So that was the first. I mentioned about Nick Spinelli's. I also bought Justin's. Nothing against Nick's. Nick's didn't work for what I was looking for. And again, we've said, right, you've got to feel it. So besides Joe's are probably my most used, and then my second most used are Justin's because he has a couple different breakdowns. He has by genre, and then within genre, he has some decades, but he has another folder that is like hip hop essentials, pop essentials.
Hmm.
So it is the best of the best. It doesn't matter the decade, it doesn't matter what it is. It is what people are going to like. If I want a pop feel, and that's specifically what I'm looking for, I'm checking one of those folders.
Yep.
If I'm looking for hip hop, I'm looking in the essentials folder first. If I want to break down and I go, you know what, I really want a 90s hip hop, then I'll go into the decades. But those Joe's with the hip hop and the party are the most. followed by the hip hop essentials and pop essentials.
And that's actually a good point. One of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is that there are some songs, if you're looking for songs that feel like bubblegum 80s music, you can find songs that came from the 80s. There's going to be some from the 90s that fit the bubblegum 80s feel. There's some songs from the last 5 years that would fit the bubblegum 80s thing. So when you get into that hip hop essentials or the bubblegum music, those types of things, you could have songs from a variety of decades that could all fit into that feel and could make really nice, really kind of cool sets and covering a lot of your dynamics. I mean, back when 50s and we'd be playing a lot of the early rock and roll from the 50s. Well, that a lot of that sound was 90. Some of the 90s country songs sounded very, very similar, and it was a very you could transition back and forth. And in some cases, it's like, wait a second, did you just drop a country song in there? Yeah, I did, but you really didn't pick it up because the energy and the texture of the music was very similar. There's just a little bit more of a twang in this one and the other one. So that becomes a one of those things that, okay, so you have these one methodologies by decade as an example, but then there's going to be the exceptions.
And I think the exceptions become key because this is really where you're going to be able to catch a lot of people at the same time, right? Like you should, in my personal philosophy, you should not be within a decade for a large portion of your night, right? Like that's I get the idea of catering to your couple, catering to, their friends and that kind of thing, because that's what's going to be on the floor. But if you also want to be able to pull in some of the extra pieces that are there, you can stay in a vibe that they are responding to, but go in a different year to grab some of the other, again, newer or younger or older rather, people that are at this wedding. And I think that really becomes key to kind of pulling it and having some fun with it.
Mm-hmm. And to be able to make some of those lists, actually, I wanted to share this quickly. When you're looking for those essentials, you can do a search, of course, and Apple's actually done a really nice job in many of these areas where they have put together some of the essential lists. And I wanted to just throw those out there. You guys can take a look at those. And then there's a lot of them that just don't. You look at some of the lists that have been made by people like the Knot, and some of them are just horrific. Apple stuff is actually fairly good. There's stuff you could add to it, but when you get into the essentials, there's some really good stuff if you were looking for ways to populate.
I would also throw up while you're at it.
Go
I
ahead.
mean, something that just showed up on mine recently. I was playing around with Spotify. Um, what are they calling it now? Um, Let me just as I should have looked it up while you were doing that part. Yeah, like all out 80s, all out 90s, all out 2000s. Like it's a playlist and again, it's using like their AI feature.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like making it for you. So this isn't some sort of a list that they've already made. But it's the biggest, like for example, the biggest songs of 2000s. And there's a 9 hour, 25-minute playlist of just 2000s. Now, I think you could get way too involved. I don't believe that it's in order from best to worst
Mm-hmm.
type of setup. But if you're looking to build, if you're looking for a way to kind of, cater to a decade type of piece, I think that would be a decent place to start. As it would be the list that John shared. How long? Oh, yeah, actually, yours isn't that bad. Yours is 100 songs, so that's
Yeah, I
much
think it was
more
the top 100.
reasonable.
Apple, for a period of time, they had the essentials, and then they had like the next step, next step. They had so you could get basically the top 400 from a genre. In this case, 80s. It was actually really neat. This was just before they allowed you to download and use the songs offline. The only way you could utilize those was to play them while you were streaming, in essence. And I don't know if you can still get the other ones, but you can get the first one. But yeah, it's like, oh man, if I could get these 400 songs, I would have 99% of the 80s music you'd need on the device, whatever that device would have been at that moment in time. But yeah, anyway, it was gone. So I think the idea behind the folders, I think Dan, your suggestion of finding someone who has a system like you found the Joe Bunn, I think that's a great starting point from that standpoint. Even if you have a fellow DJ and you're just basically, hey, take a screenshot of your folders just to give you an idea, is a great way. But ultimately, we keep coming back to it. It's got to make sense for you. And that's why one of my folders is Yacht Rock folders. And that Yacht Rock folder has things from the 70s. It has things from the 80s. It has some stuff in there that is starting to borderline in the 90s because it has that feel, and it fits into that. So there are times I've been out running and listening to something that's like, ooh, that feels like it should be in that folder. It's not that genre whatsoever, but it feels like it should be, whatever that folder happens to be.
Yeah, I think it's key to have those. And there's nothing wrong with looking at somebody's setup and for them to share it out and get an idea of what to do and just try something. Make a separate folder that is, I talked about don't destroy your setup because then you're stuck your next event, but create a separate crate, like a master crate, and then a bunch of them within, or master virtual folder and then a bunch of them within. That would be this new setup, and just try it. Don't go and spend 30 hours setting this up. Spend an hour or two, and then just kind of play with that what you've set up and see if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is we'd love to be able to say like, hey, just do this and this is what's going to be work for everybody. But we're not all the same DJ.
Yeah.
Even if we all did the same type of event, even if we had the same type of clients, we're still not the same. And so what we have is not going to work across the board, but it can at least give you a start to say, okay, I like this. Even if and this is the other thing, like with the Joe setup that I have, I've gone in and I've tweaked it.
Sure.
There's things that I like that was in there that I'm like, great, I'm going to keep those in there, and they help me fill things out. And there's something I went, yeah, that's got to be a Southern thing because there's no way I'm playing that song up here.
Precisely. Yeah.
And that's the other thing you got to keep in mind is that, depending on who you're reaching out to or where you're getting your list from, it might make sense and it might not make any lick of sense. And
Mm-hmm.
what type of clients do they get? Are they getting the same type of clients you have too? These are all little weird things.
Little nuances that are going to change the trajectory really quite quickly. That they would. There was something else I wanted to. Can't remember. One of those things that just went flittle away. Couldn't have been that important, I guess. Then I can't remember what it was.
Because you're remembering Uber Eats, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. I was pretty excited about that. So, yeah. So we up next out at DJNTV.com/chill. Hanging with Howie is going to be up tonight in the chill room. You can go out there and hang out and talk shop and talk music, talk whatever. It's basically a hall room discussion that can go on until the wee hours of the morning. And if it doesn't go on until the wee hours of the morning tonight, it probably will tomorrow night on Tuesday night when they do the Tuesday night music show at 10 o'clock Eastern. And then from there, it goes on into the wee hours of the morning. And I think it was last week or the week before, it was 5 in the morning. I get notification basically when the last person leaves. A half an hour later, the room shuts down. And it was like 5 in the morning. So that meant they were still talking at 4:30 in the morning. Ugh, kids. So that's going on tonight again in here about 10 minutes, and then tomorrow night with the Tuesday night music show. So I actually I don't know if you got a chance to catch the 2 weeks ago I did this video on imposter syndrome, which was kind of a takeoff from what Brian Red had talked about the imposter syndrome a little bit, and I actually had some people reach out talking about their struggle with that world and how that has been such a huge part of their life. And it's something I've talked to DJs over the years, and you've kind of you can pick it up a little bit, and you can get a feel for it when people are, get to that point where they're being honest and brutally honest at times with how they are. But if you guys haven't watched the video, just go to youtube.com/discjockeynews and look up imposter syndrome. You'll find it. It's a short 4 or 5 minute video, whatever it is, but it turned out that I think this is actually more prevalent than I thought it was, that there's a lot of people who have that level of self-consciousness out there, which again, as I talk to my kids, I've talked about, it's a real thing. I've experienced it on a regular basis. And I talked about how I've gotten to the point of being able to deal with that and moving beyond it. But it's definitely a real thing, and I guess a lot of people who are also finding ways to live with that. So anyway, something to check out. I think it's time to call it a night, Dan.
Guess it is. I guess it is. Are we going to preview next week, or are we just going to let
Oh,
that happen
hey,
until?
yeah, we could do that. For those of you still hanging out, next week we're actually going to be talking wedding music. We are going to, well, let me back up. Both Dan and I've been running an awful lot, and we started. Dan mentioned he had listened to Mike Walter's Mixcloud mixes of wedding dances. Basically, he has an hour of dance music or 40 minutes of dance music. The second dance set for this couple's wedding, that couple's wedding. So I started listening to it, and I'm thinking to myself, we're going to have Mike. For those of you who go to Mixcloud, search DJ Mike Walter, find it, follow him, and you're going to get to hear literally his sets. And in many cases, you're hearing his sets and his announcements that he's making during these, how he's working the crowd and things. So it's really kind of a neat. It's like being at, the little, fly in a corner, but you got your eyes closed because you're only listening to it. But you get an idea of some of those, and so I brought it up to Dan. It's like, Dan, we should have Mike come on and kind of talk about that and such. So that's next Monday night, Memorial Monday. We're going to have Mike Walter join us, and we're going to talk wedding music and kind of get his take on it. Because as you listen to, I think the diversity is the part that's really kind of hitting me. With that. And again, that'll be next Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern. It'll be right on our YouTube channel, and you guys will be able to catch that. But Mike Walter will be joining us. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. I hopefully you got some ideas, some different thoughts on what you can do with your folders, with your crates, and start to maybe make some sense, or even just get yourself a little bit more organized from what you were before. After all, that's going to be the key to helping your sets just move along at a much quicker pace. All right. Have yourself a good one, and we will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.